Chapter 4. Nellie and Stuart played croquet until it was fairly dusk. There were shouts of laughter, and much hurrying around, as if no time was to be lost. Mama and I went quietly about our duties, and when I had the children in bed, I came into the nursery and sat down to have a brief talk with her. By this time the click of the balls had ceased, and the three were strolling up and down the street. "How odd it seems," I said. "I wonder if we shall get along nicely." "Don't begin to fear thus early, Mr. Faintheart," returned Mama, smilingly. "It will not be as nice as having our house to ourselves, but we are not doing it for pure enjoyment. When we are tired, and worried, and discouraged, we must think of all the nice things we shall buy in the fall, and be comforted. We shall have Papa a new study carpet, and get his chair freshly covered. And if it could be Russia leather, that would last him all his life. At all events, we will spend half on him, and I am sure he will deserve it. He will, likely, be the greatest sufferer by the confusion. The boys will be out of doors much of the time, no doubt. We must try to improve our invalid as rapidly as possible." "Poor boy." "Mama," I said, "what a great generous heart you have. You always pity everyone. I have a suspicion that Mr. Lewis is cross as well as sick. Then we must minister to the mind as well as the body. I am glad that Stuart is bright and cheerful. Oh, those children must come in," she said, starting up. "Fanny is so thoughtless." They answered the summons, but sat down on the porch step, where Stuart finished a story of boyish school pranks, which was very amusing, to say the least. Papa came in time to hear the last of it, and shook his head rather sagely. "It is past 10, announced Mama. "Country bedtime," said Stuart, gaily. "I suppose, Mrs. Endicott, that is a hint for me to go stir up my bear, and listen to a few growls. A menagerie, 10 cents admittance. Who'll venture in? Don't all speak at once, or the place may be crowded. Perhaps, since he is not very well, you had better sleep in another room tonight," Mama said. "Because he might eat me up in the night, since he refused his supper." "I am much obliged, Mrs. Endicott." Mama came around a trifle, so that she faced him, and, standing in the shaded light, raised her soft, dark eyes to his, and said, "This is out of consideration to him, and not the fear of what will happen to you. That will be the thought for you to go to bed with, and see if you cannot resolve it into a lesson worth the learning. If I adopt you into my household, I shall train you as one of my children. And you will be astonished to see what marvels a little care for the feelings of others will work." Stuart blushed and smiled, said good night, and followed Papa to the best guest chamber, that I had put in such lovely order, and so there was quiet through the night. Lewis did not make his appearance at breakfast, but Stuart had been in stirring him up, for we heard the growls. But he was so merry and good-natured when he came down, that one had not the heart to find any fault. Indeed, he kept the children laughing all through the meal. "What is there to do in this queer little town, Mr. Endicott?" he asked presently. "Fishing, I suppose, the staple amusement of lazy people." "Any hunting?" "Not at this season, and very little at any. There are some nice rambles, and the fishing, as you say." "Any young fellows that one would like?" "Yes, a number, though some of them keep pretty busy during the day. And I forgot rowing. There are boats to be had." "Thank you. I'll take a saunter round. I always do have the luck of finding someone. And there are books in the library? You may like to keep fresh for fall." So your brother was a good deal disappointed at not passing. Yes. It wouldn't have troubled me. Steve was not a bit anxious, so I should have let it go without a sigh. There is nothing like resignation in this world. You are an admirable pattern of it, said Fanny. I feel tempted to envy you. I have another fortnight of school, and fearful examinations are hanging over my devoted head. Couldn't I go in your stead? I am fresh from it all, and might save you much vanity and vexation of spirit. Especially the vanity. Your kindness is only exceeded by your great beauty. Shakespeare. Fanny, said Papa. Mama rose from the table, and prepared a dainty breakfast upon a waiter, pouring the coffee in a pretty medallion cup that had been given her at Christmas. Then she took it herself. Stuart sprang up with an instinct of gentlemanliness. You are not going to carry that upstairs? He asked, in surprise. Why not? If you are not going to send a servant, I will take it. You may carry it for me, if you like, but I wish to make a call upon your brother. He was her attendant as far as the door, but when her summons was answered, she dismissed him. Then she walked straight to the bedside, placing her tray on a small table. Are you rested this morning? She asked, gently. I think you will feel better for some breakfast. I am sorry that you should be so fatigued and ill, for a place seldom looks bright under such circumstances. But we will do our best for you, and you must try as well. The scowl remained in his forehead. He raised himself on his elbow, and turned towards her, though his eyes were still averted. I am obliged for the trouble, though I do not need any breakfast, he said, rather gruffly. I think you do need it. Here is a glass of cool spring water, and some fragrant coffee. A little of both may revive you. Does your head still ache? If I had known just what to do for you, I should have come again last night. Was it you who? And his face flushed a swarthy scarlet. Yes, and Mama looked steadily at him out of her sweet brown eyes. He moved uneasily, and in his heart wished she were away. Was it you who came last evening? He asked, in a low, wondering tone. Yes. I felt anxious about you. I knew you were in a strange place, and, doubtless, feeling awkward and lonesome. That must be my apology. Oh, he exclaimed, don't make any to me. I acted like a boor. I am sorry and ashamed. And I don't deserve that you should take all this trouble for me. But I had been. And I did sympathize with you to the utmost. The disappointment must have proved great. But I do believe it will be much better for you to wait. You were not strong enough to take up a college course. Yet I had said those things over and over again. I knew them fairly well, at least. And to have all those boobies set up and sneer. I could have killed them. He looked so at the moment. Oh, Mama said, you must not think of this now. Do not try to keep the angry flames alive. It is a bright, lovely morning, and if you could make the effort to come down on the porch, you would feel so much better. Try this coffee to please me. You are very kind and solicitous. There was a little tremble in his voice, but he made no effort to touch the food. If you appreciate it, you will begin your breakfast before everything gets cold. You will feel more like rising then. Come, I mean to cheer you up in spite of yourself. This is not Doubting Castle, and I cannot take in giant despair. He smiled faintly then, and sipped his coffee. There, Mama said, in her bright, cheery way, you have made a small beginning, and that gives me faith in you. Now I must go back to my flock. Downstairs there is a cool, pleasant library, and a piano, which always stands open. I want you to feel at home. You are good, he returned. Can I have the library to myself, or only with Mr. Endicott? Yes, or the parlor, either. Indeed, Mr. Endicott has finished his sermons, and will be out nearly all day. Thank you. Stuart was lying in wait at the foot of the stairs. Well, with a gay little laugh, did you beard the lion in his den? I must go up and make him roar. No, said Mamma, laying her hand on his arm, you must not go up, and I ask, as a personal favor, that you will not tease him this whole day. Tease him? The baby. Poor little thing. I have promised him a quiet morning. You will not compel me to break my word. Then I shall have to go out and hunt up some fun. She smiled in her irresistible fashion, that conquered if it did not convince. We had made an exception, and done the most of our Saturday's work on Friday morning. So now there was only a little dusting, with the usual making of beds, and all that. I had just finished the other rooms, when Louis left his, and went quietly down to the study, shutting himself in. To Mamma's satisfaction, he had eaten nearly all the breakfast she had prepared. I put the room in its usual order. Oddly enough, I found a withered rose under the pillow, and it was still sweet. I remembered that Stephen was very fond of roses. There were ever so many small articles strewn about. I thought those big boys were as careless as the children. Papa came in just before dinner was ready, and had a little chat with Louis, though the young man was not disposed to be social. At dinner he seemed dreadfully awkward and embarrassed, his sallow cheeks, flushing at the least word. Somehow I was glad Stuart was not there. Afterwards he went up to his room, and spent the whole afternoon alone. We had rather a funny time. Stuart came in late, and insisted upon having his dinner in the kitchen, telling Anne 2 or 3 such laughable Irish stories, that they were friends straightway. Then he would insist upon carrying Fan's basket when she was ready to start on her visitation, as she called it. It was as good as a play, he said afterwards. I thought I should smile audibly at that old lady Mrs. Means, I believe you called her. She is an ungrateful wretch, Mrs. Endicott. She did not like such light, chaffy bread, it had no heart. You might as well eat sawdust. And she wanted to know how many eggs were in the custard, and when people sent currants, she wished they would send sugar, too. Nasty, sour things. Why, I had half a mind to hustle the gifts back in the basket, and bring them home. We are not to get weary in well-doing, said Mamma. I'm not sure, but a little wholesome hunger would be good. And then that old Mrs. Bogart. Doesn't she look funny there in the bed, with her little, wrinkled face and that flapping cap ruffle? And her talk, and the queer way in which she keeps questioning her maid Betty, how long is it since I was tuck-sick, in that high, cracked voice, which sounds like a smashed hand organ with a monkey grinding it. Betty, tell the gentleman how I fell down the cellar stairs. Betty, bring me my snuff box, maybe the young gentleman will take a pinch. He imitated Mrs. Bogart's tone so exactly, that we could not help laughing. Did you take a pinch? Asked Nellie. Of course I did. And such sneezing. It was dreadful, said Fan, with a reproachful look. And not a bit in earnest. How did you do it? Nellie questioned. This way. There isn't any method of spelling such terrific sneezing. No combination of letters would do it justice. I thought I wouldn't laugh, but I did, and the children screamed. Good snuff wasn't it? He said, with a droll wink. I don't see how you can do it, all in fun, said wide-eyed Daisy. I do not believe I shall take you out with me again, commented Fan, severely. But I know the way now. I shall drop in to see the old lady often, and get a pinch of snuff. Oh, dear. I am almost worn out with my arduous duties. Can anyone stay me with a glass, and comfort me with cold water, the literal for apples and love, and then can't we dissipate on croquet? If I sit still much longer I shall have the rickets. My physician prescribed active exercise. You had better take the baby out in her carriage, if you want exercise, said Tiny Tim, having heard the two connected some way. He laughed. 4. Satan finds some mischief still for idle hands to do. Isn't that in the hymn book? Not in mine, returned Fan. Well, I am sure it is in the spelling book. I learned it somewhere, and it is about a busy bee. Good instructions, like pins, are never lost. But pins are lost. Your logic is faulty. No, they're always gone before, that is, before you want them. You are too smart for your size, said Fan. I am afraid you'll grow up a dunce. Well, you cannot have all the virtues for a little money. As it is, I think of striking for higher wages. You are not worth what you get now, said Fan, running away. Stuart did not venture upstairs until just before supper. Louis declined to come down, so Mama sent him some tea, berries, and biscuits. I am afraid you are beginning in a way to make trouble for yourself, Papa said, thoughtfully, afterwards. I am going to indulge him for a few days. He is nervous, and really bashful, and I want him to learn to like us. But he cannot be forced to do anything. I believe I like my girls the best, said Papa, fondly. Saturday evenings, when no one dropped in, were our choicest time of all the week. Mama played, and we all sang. This time no one came to disturb us. And we never knew, until long afterwards, that Louis Duncan listened with his eyes full of tears, and had not the courage to join us. But it always appeared to me like a little bit of heaven below. Papa's sweet tenor voice seemed to belong to some particular hymns, and it took me far above the petty workday affairs. How good and lovely he was in his everyday walks and ways. Louis began to get somewhat acquainted with us on Sunday. He did not go to church, but lay on the bed reading nearly all day. No one found any fault with him, and Stuart's teasing tongue was hushed. I think he stood a little in awe of my mother, gentle as she was. It was plain to see that the boys had been brought up with mere outward forms of religion, that they had no love and very little respect for it. How different they were from Stephen. But the enforced quiet was broken on Monday morning. There were some high words, and then an unmistakable blow, followed by a struggle and a fall. Papa went upstairs. Boys, he said, with severe but simple dignity, are you brothers, and must you quarrel if you have no respect for yourselves? I implore you to have a little for my house, that has hitherto been the abode of harmony. I will not have it. The combatants paused, and glared at each other with angry eyes. Stuart had come off victor, for it was Louis who had fallen. He was deadly white now, with a blue line about the mouth. I want to be struck as if I was a child, exclaimed Stuart, with fierce determination, and he struck me. I told you to let that brush alone, said the other, sullenly. Your own was there. Stuart, go in the room opposite and finish your toilet. I shall expect an apology from you both when you come downstairs. Breakfast is ready. It seemed as if we were to have neither of them, but when the meal was about half over Stuart entered the room. His face was flushed, and his eyes were still sending out fiery rays, but he went straight to Papa. Mr. Endicott, he said, making an effort to steady his voice, I am truly sorry that I should have been so rude and ungentlemanly in your house. I ask your pardon and yours, Mrs. Endicott. I pardon you on condition that a similar event never happens, while you are here, at least. You are both too old to fall into such rough and tumble schoolboy fights. Mama held out her hand to him as he passed her. He blushed deeply, but seized it with a thankful eagerness. After that our meal was very silent. And went upstairs to see if Louis would have any breakfast. Sure, he's crosser than two sticks when the fire is kindlin'. He doesn't want sup nor bite, and if he did, it's little he'd get from me. So Mama judged that it was best to pay no further attention to him. He did not even come down at noon, and then Stuart found that his door was locked. Quite late in the afternoon I was hurrying through the hall, when he opened his door suddenly. His hair was tumbled, his cheeks scarlet, and his eyes wild and staring. "For God's sake, get me a drink of water," he cried, hoarsely. I took it up to him, and knocked, but there was no answer. I made some ado opening the door, and walked in rather timidly. He was laughing and talking incoherently but clutched at the pitcher of water and drank great, desperate swallows. Then he sank back on the bed exhausted. I ran to Mama in a fright. "Louis Duncan is sick and out of his mind," I cried. "Oh, Mama, I am sorry they came. We shall have our hands full of trouble." She went to the room with me. He did not appear to know either of us, and we could not rouse him to any coherency. "It is a fever. The doctor must be sent for immediately. Tell Nellie to go. And, Rose, we must arrange the other room, and take him over there, since it may be a long illness. Well, we must have patience. God knows what is for the best." I soon had everything in order. Papa coming in, he partly led and partly carried Louis to the best room. Mama bathed his head and put some draughts on his wrists and his feet. Now he lay quietly, with his eyes half open, breathing heavily. Dr. Hawley called just before supper. "A bad case," he said, gravely, "a bad case. Why, the fellow is worn to skin and bone already, and looks as if he had had the jaundice for the last month. But we will do our best. He may be stronger than he appears." Stuart felt pretty sober that evening. "I suppose I ought not to have stirred him up so this morning," he said. "But it is such fun. And it was all about a trifle. I used his hair brush, and he is as particular as any old maid. Then I tormented him a little, and he seized the brush and gave me a box on the ear, which I won't take from any one without a row. I am not a baby. And it was awful mean of him. And so we clinched. But he has been in a dreadful temper for the last month. He was mad because Stephen wouldn't let him go to Lake George with a lot of fellows. It was fortunate that he did not," returned Mama. "And, Stuart, I hope, in the weeks to come, you will learn your duty towards him. God has not given you this tie for you to disregard so utterly." Stuart looked at her with wondering eyes, but made no answer. "Our first experience with boys seems to be rather trying," said Fanny, as we were going to bed that night. "I hope and pray that he may not die and in our house." I thought of what Stephen had asked of me.
Please follow the next chapter and please press subscribe and share. Thank you very much.